Hey, Wargamers, one of the biggest things that we do in our online communities is break down wargaming lists. So for 40K, we're looking at different army lists and how they're constructed and, do they have strengths or weaknesses and how might they play on the tabletop. And that's one of the funnest things about 40K, at least for me personally, is building lists and doing the whole mental game of, would this work? What are the strengths and weaknesses? All that stuff, right? So that type of discussion is a really valuable part of our community, but also something that just creates a lot of data. And that data can be used by generative AI. And so that's what I want to talk about today is can we use generative AI, things like ChatGPT, to help write army lists for games like 40K? So there's decades of discourse at this point online, right? Going back to, to the beginning of message forums, places like Advanced How Tactica brings a bell to me. But there are decades of interactions between people about how to build 40K lists. And these span many different editions at this point, many different armies, many different scenarios and comp lists, and all sorts of different contexts in which these discussions have taken place. But across all those different contexts, many of the elements of list design are consistent, right? We're still playing a tabletop war game where we're trying to, achieve objectives and have to deal with certain archetypes of opponents or play styles. And so many elements of list design are consistent. It's just different rules, different characters or units filling the respective roles within those components of list design. And so there's an opportunity here, or there is a capacity here. I don't know if it's really an opportunity, but we'll say a capacity, right? A capacity here for large language models, things like ChatGPT, which are trained on the bulk of the internet's wisdom, to echo or mimic some of that conventional wisdom that has become the prevailing voice throughout these decades of content, right? So those big picture ideas can be captured in AI training and regurgitated, reflected to people using generative AI to build lists. Um, and so this is an interesting thing to me. Right off the bat, we would assume that whatever ChatGPT will tell you about list building is probably going to be biased against the most recent rule set or the most recent data because there's just less of it, and ChatGPT doesn't update that frequently. So having really cutting edge insights is probably outside the scope of a large language model at this point. But the older stuff is probably going to be more well represented, or at least the things that have the most representation. If we go way back in time, there's probably going to be less representation just because there's fewer people using the internet, there's less data out there, the farther back we go. But as we get more and more recent, there's more and more people, more and more data being generated, and so it's probably like a hump shaped curve, a bell shaped curve, about the bias in the data relative to time. But despite that, there is this ability of AI to distill these large amounts of data into kind of the prevailing thought, or at least some some form of synthesis, right? And so maybe ChatGPT is going to be able to give us the same quality of advice as social media would, right? If social media is largely filled with people that are, echoing their same ideas anyway, ChatGPT should be able to pick up on that, right? And so I wanted to see how this worked, right? I want to try using ChatGPT to build a list or at least give advice on a list and see where I thought it was correct and where it kind of missed the mark. So to do that, I wrote a pretty casual anti-marine equivalent list. And in particular, this is a list that I wrote after the last FAQ, thinking about a game with my friend who plays Blood Angels and wanting to try some things out with that list. So the list that I gave ChatGPT was 2 Fireblades, a Farsight, Cold Star with Plasma, 2 Breacher squads, 2 Devilfish for the Breachers to go in, a Starsight squad with Flamers, a Fire Knife squad with Plasma, 2 Crew Carnivore units, a unit of Pathfinders with Rail Rifles, 2 Piranhas with Fusion Blasters, 3 Stealth Teams, of course, a unit of Vespid, and a Storm Surge with the Driver Cannon. And I asked ChatGPT specifically, I said, evaluate this list for competitive effectiveness in Warhammer 40k. And so that's the prompt I used. I think probably, there's some variation that you're going to get based on exactly what prompt you give. But this is the prompt that I use in this case. And ChatGPT gave me a pretty good breakdown of a few different elements of the list. So it started off with strengths. It said, this list has aggressive Mont-Ka pressure, which is correct because it's the Mont-Ka detachment that I'm using, and it correctly picked up on some conventional wisdom about what these different units do, right? It says Breachers and Devilfish with Fireblades deliver devastating close-range shooting with Pulse Blasters. That's true, yeah. And then Mont-Ka allows you to advance and shoot in the early turns. Yeah, okay, great. And that's good for Breachers and Crisis Suits, yeah. Balanced threat portfolio. It says that I have anti-tank in the form of Storm Surge, Piranhas, Seeker Missiles, Cold Star. Cold Star Plasma, sure, that could be light anti-vehicle. Anti-infantry, breachers, flamers, stealth suits, SMS, saturation, sure. Midboard control with stealth suits, crew pathfinders, yes. All that makes sense. Board presence says stealth suits with homing beacons can enable crisis reinforcements exactly where needed. And this is one of the first errors that I noticed in the model. And the reason why I call this an error is because homing beacons used to allow you to put crisis suits exactly where they're needed, right? In previous editions, when homing beacons allow you to ignore deep strike penalties and stuff, or restrictions, that's what they did. But now they just allow you to, deploy when you want to, basically, right? You rapid ingress. And so this isn't quite right anymore. It also said Crew and Vespid are good for objective holders. That's true. Piranhas provide mobility and contest potential. That's also true. And then it talks about the Storm Surge Anchor, how that would force opponents to either commit to bringing it down or let it do its thing. And that's also true. So the bulk of this information is accurate. I think that these are good insights, especially for people that are just coming into the hobby, to help them think about how to construct a list, right? Having these anti-tank, anti-infantry, midboard control elements, having these different components of your list present are good things to think about in list design. And I think ChatGPT did a good job of picking up on those big picture elements. It just got a little confused here with some specific rules that have changed more recently. And as you would expect, because it gave me strengths, it also gave me weaknesses. It says the Storm Surge is a fire magnet. It says at 400 points, which, the points value here is something that I gave it in the list format, right? Because I just copy and pasted out of the Warhammer app, the list builder app, to into ChatGPT. So it knew that it was 400 points. So I don't know if that's that's probably just because I provided it with that information. I don't think that it mined that 400 points out of the internet, because there probably would be a lot of conflicting information about that. Small crisis teams. It says 2 minimum squads, means that they hit hard but they're fragile. This is an issue because there's only one size squad for crisis suits now, right? So there is no minimum or maximum. They're just the same. So this is misleading. This harkens back to when you could take 6-man squads of crisis suits, for example. Durability issues. It says lots of drones and some shield gens, but most units fold quickly. You'll trade aggressively, but may run out of bodies on objectives. Yes, but again, the lots of drones comment here is indicative of a training that's based in older editions where drones directly contributed to durability. Now, the only thing that really makes a difference here for durability is the shield gen or the shield drones. So yes, like having drones, specifically shield drones, is valuable here, and also like guardian drones. But I think this is a misleading comment. Um, right, like adding more gun drones to a unit would not affect durability, right? So that's a misleading comment from ChatGPT. Command point drain. It talks about Devilfish, Piranha, Storm Surge, Crisis. You're going to want a bunch of different stratagems, and yes, but the stratagems that suggest are Strike and Fade, which no is not part of Manka. Point Blank Ambush, no, that's not part of Manka. Focus Fire is the only stratagem here that actually is part of the Manka stratagem set. So again, misleading at best, but kind of a like kind of confusing, like why are piranhas the command point drain here and not other things. Yeah, I think this is, yes, this is a generally true thing that command points are a scarce resource, especially in detachments like Macabre. But I think the logic behind why command points are limited here is flawed. And then secondary play, it talks about getting secondaries and stuff, and saying Crude or Vespid would help, but you don't have dedicated mission play tools, which I tend to disagree with that. I think that's exactly what having Crude and Vespid and Piranhas, everything that I talked about in the strengths component, are there for. So it's a little odd that they give that to you. Then moves on to evaluate the competitive effectiveness in the current meta. It says into Marines or Mech, into Horde or like Orcs, into heavy armor, and tournament play. And I this is probably the part that I'd be most skeptical of, just in general. The thing that really I think stands out as something that would be erroneous is just like the suggestion of top builds being double Storm Surge gun lines, Crisis Spam, Crude Tide, and Macabre use. Like I don't think that those are really where the the meta are at, in some ways. But certainly those units can be components of meta builds, but I don't know if we're necessarily calling them those things right now. So that's something that I think is a little off. But the overall impressions that it has, like Breachers and Crisis against Power Armor, yeah, that's an accurate perception. Flamers against Hordes, yeah, that's an accurate perception. In the heavy armor, it says it's risky because you have some punch, but if those things are removed, then you're vulnerable. And yeah, that's also true, right? Like I don't think that my breachers and plasma units here are necessarily going to do a lot of heavy lifting against things like knights. So yeah, I think generally the impressions here are correct because they're looking at these broad scale archetypes, like just in general, what do breachers do, regardless of the particular rule set? In general, what do piranhas do? In general, what do crisis suits do? Right? It's looking at these generalizations of different unit types and concluding based on the preponderance of data that X unit is effective against Y unit, and so it's able to make that assessment, but it misses some of the details when looking at things that are really contemporary. Okay, and then finally it comes up with some suggestions to be more competitive. So it says, consider dropping Vespid, add marker support or another cheap screening unit. No, like Vespid are just one of the things that said was weaknesses was having like objective control or kind of like utility units, and that's exactly what Vespid is. So this is a contradictory recommendation, and one that I just don't think is a good one. So yeah, Vespid I think are a really valuable tool, and it would be erroneous, especially given the weaknesses that the model already identified in the army list, to drop them. Bigger crisis unit. Again, it has this perception that crisis suits can be like these big Death Star units. They can't. And so this is a strictly wrong recommendation. It talks about the pulse driver and the pulse blast cannon. I think there are valuable reasons to take either. And so I'm not going to pick real hard on his recommendation about that. Swap Pathfinders for Tetras if Forge World is allowed. This is something where, again, I think it's showing its age, where Tetras are not allowed anymore. They're a Legends unit. So it's not about it being Forge World. It's about it being Legends, and that's the problem. So I even if you give ChatGPT the benefit of the doubt here and say, like, it's just saying, oh, if they're allowed, you can take them. The reason for it being allowed is erroneous. Then also secondary play, it says talking about lone operative characters like Ethereals and Darkstrider. Neither of those have lone operative, so no. That's incorrect. You could take Shadow Sun, yeah, like that's true, or Ghost Kill. Both of those would be valid recommendations here, but not Ethereal and Darkstrider for that reason. And so I could go through all of the things that were wrong with this and tell ChatGPT, like, hey, you should do these things better, get good, scrub. But ChatGPT, do you even play ChatGPT? But I did give it just a couple pointers here. I said Tetras are no longer legal and Crisis can only be 3-man units, and so it says, okay, thanks, and that changes the tuning options quite a bit. Let's reevaluate with those constraints. And then it came back here with a recommended list of what I can use. And so the list that it spits out at me, of course, starts off with characters, or which it calls HQ. Again, this is harkening back to the old force organization chart designations, and it tends to utilize these things interchangeably, which I think is an interesting insight in some ways, because in many ways these are somewhat analogous, but they are from different time periods and different rule sets. So it's interesting that it's trying to marry these things together in the particular ways that it does, and you'll see more of that as we go through the list. But yeah, it starts off with HQ or characters. It says Farsight, Warlord trait, free and current rules. What? What is that? Okay, thanks for that, ChatGPT. Cold Star Battlesuit, Plasma Rifle, Shield Gen, Shield Drones, yep. Enhancement, Coordinated Exploitation, that's a legitimate recommendation. Cadre Fireblade, Strategic Conqueror is a legitimate recommendation, but it says that this is for CP regen, which is not true. That's not what a Strategic Conqueror does. So a little bit of erroneous recommendation there. It correctly identifies breachers as battle line, so it's clearly been trained on things that have been updated since the introduction of battle line into the game, and it gives reasonable recommendations for those units as well. Also says dedicated transport for Devilfish with accelerated burst cannon. Yep, those are totally reasonable expectations. And I would think that this is partially because of the preponderance or the number of times that Breacher teams and Devilfish have been used in lists that have been shared online, right? Like it's probably like, yeah, I got this one. I nailed this one. And then it says elites or suits, which is kind of, again, a weird distinction here. And yes, in Taolas, many of the elites are battle suits, or the former elites were battle suits, but not exclusively. And so this is a bit of a weird designation here. It talks about the Fire Knife team, Star Scythe team, stealth suits. Those are all fine. But for some reason on the third stealth battlesuit unit, it leaves out marker drones and shield drones, which it had included in the earlier units. So that's a little strange that they are not consistent in that listing. And then the army list wraps up with fast attack, troops, and heavy support. Again, old force organization chart designations that no longer apply, especially for Kroot carnivores. Yes, they used to be troops, but now the analogous thing would be battle line, and they're not battle line. So it's a little interesting that they are including those here in a somewhat misleading way. For fast attack, it said Pathfinder team, right? Two Pathfinder teams, 2 piranhas, just like we had. So it's adding an extra Pathfinder team here and dropping the Vespid. Storm Surge with the blast cannon, and it italicizes blast cannon for emphasis there, which is interesting. So overall, how'd it go? Well, ChatGPT was pretty decent at the big picture stuff. I think that it did a good job of the general strengths and weaknesses of the list, because again, those are kind of anchored in archetypes or general ideas of what different units do on the tabletop, regardless of the rule set, right? And so I think it did a pretty good job at that. And I think those are a lot of the same types of opinions, if you want to call it that, if you want to say that ChatGPT has an opinion. I don't know, philosophers, you can chime in on that. But the opinion of ChatGPT here, I think, mirrors a lot of what you would see online. If you went on a forum and asked people for feedback, I think you get a lot of the same types of insight. But where ChatGPT stumbled was the details of the current rule set, right? There's a lot of important details missed, whether that's it kind of missing some details of what particular loadouts would be good, what particular units do. It has somewhat of an outdated perspective on what the army does. And again, I think that's linked to the bulk of the training data being outdated at this point, right? And so despite like the efficacy of the model at providing feedback at the large scale, and like these big picture ideas, you would still want some knowledgeable coaching from someone, right? You'd want someone, a person that's experienced with the army list to give you feedback on things that you might want to consider in list design, but also how you'd want to actually play the army. And so this makes me think that the ChatGPT feedback here probably doesn't align with player needs, right? Like people that are knowledgeable enough to pick out the things that are wrong about ChatGPT probably don't need ChatGPT, and the people that aren't knowledgeable enough to pick out the errors in ChatGPT probably are the ones that would want to use it. So I think there's a disconnect there between who ChatGPT could actually help and who would want to use it. Instead, what ChatGPT might be good for is just like providing a basic framework for new players to start investigating on their own, right? And this is always the catch-22 with generative AI right now, is that it can provide you with information, but it's still up to you as a user to vet that information and investigate further. And many people don't do that, right? Many people just say, okay, thanks ChatGPT, copy paste, done. And that is not going to be an effective strategy for utilizing this tool. So I think ChatGPT might have a role here in helping new players just start to think about compositions, although a lot of that they could probably get just by looking online at existing army lists on their own that we know are going to be legitimate and legal under current rule sets as well. So, or at least we have a much higher confidence in that compared to just the generative AI output, right? So, yeah, does ChatGPT do a good job at coaching? Not really. I think it helps you start to think about things, but again, you would be able to have those conversations just by hopping on a forum. So overall, I tend to think that ChatGPT here fails in what you would really want it to do. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Have you been using ChatGPT or other AI like Gemini or whatever to explore your army list, or even do some strategizing? Let me know in the comments below, and I'd love to have a conversation about this. As always, thanks for watching, and happy wargaming. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. This channel, this video are made possible by my supporters over on Patreon, so if you enjoyed this video, consider joining our community over there as well. Additionally, we have Invasive Wargaming models back in stock, probably for the last time. There's the original Invasive Wargaming model, plus 2 new sculpts as well, so head on over to the Invasive Wargaming Etsy shop and check those out.